Welcome to the Essential Case Manager's Guide from Admission to Discharge. In this first module, we will be discussing background of eligibility and case manager assignment, comprehensive assessment, finding the correct sources of information, difficulties with engagement, initial meeting, notes and examples. How do people arrive at our door? An individual or someone on behalf of an individual has applied for Department of Mental Health Services. An eligibility determination specialist has determined that the individual meets clinical criteria for DMH services and forwards the eligibility file to the appropriate local site office. The site director or designee assigns a supervisor or other site staff to conduct a needs and means determination. That staff person, in consultation with the site director, determine, based on the needs and means interview, that the individual is in fact eligible for a DMH service, specifically case management, and you have been assigned as the case manager in MHIS. Where do you begin? The first thing to remember is that it is outlined in 104 CMR 29.07 that a case manager needs to complete a comprehensive assessment of the client's strengths, preferences, service needs, and goals within 20 business days of assignment. The comprehensive assessment is needed before the ISP is developed because the comprehensive assessment informs the ISP. The ISP needs to be completed within 10 business days of the completion of the comprehensive assessment. There will be times when a case manager has sufficient records in the eligibility file to complete the initial comprehensive assessment. The client, in this case, may be a good historian and eager to share information, including signing releases, so the case manager can speak with their providers, family, and significant others. There will be other times when there is very little information in the eligibility file, and a client may be guarded about sharing information with you, including not authorizing you to speak with providers, family, and significant others. The initial comprehensive assessment, regardless of whether the case manager is satisfied with the information they have available to complete it, still needs to be completed within 20 business days of assignment. If a case manager receives additional information regarding the client after the case manager has completed, signed, and dated the initial comprehensive assessment, there is a comprehensive assessment addendum in MHIS that is available to document any additional information a case manager receives after the initial comprehensive assessment has been completed. There may be those rare times when a supervisor may assign a case manager as responsible user for a new client prior to officially assigning as the case manager. This could occur only when a supervisor anticipates that the initial stages of engagement may take longer than usual due to circumstances such as the need to arrange for language or deaf interpreters. As a responsible user, a case manager is not responsible for a comprehensive assessment or an ISP. It is important to note, however, that if a case manager has been assigned as a responsible user, that client will not appear on the case manager's billing list. While a client is only assigned to a case manager as a responsible user, this is a non-billable service. Only after the client is assigned to the case manager officially do the timelines begin for the initial comprehensive assessment. In those rare times when a case manager is assigned as a responsible user, every effort should be made to meet with the client face-to-face as quickly as possible. Just as a reminder, a case manager can access language or deaf interpreters through the DMH Office of Race, Equity, and Inclusion, which oversees DMH's Interpreter and Translation Service Program through contracted interpreters and translators. Case managers can also utilize the on-demand phone interpreter service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, when an in-person interpreter is not available. More than 200 languages are available through the phone interpreter service, and callers are connected to an interpreter in minutes. Call the toll-free number 888-304-6005 to use the phone interpreter services. Where do you get the information needed for the comprehensive assessment? A case manager gets needed information for the comprehensive assessment from many different sources. The following list is not intended to be in the order of importance. The Eligibility Packet from the Clinical Authorization Unit contains important information and should be reviewed thoroughly. In this packet, there will be various treatment records such as psychiatric inpatient and outpatient information, signed releases of information, guardianship documents, and the Eligibility Determination Specialist Clinical Summary. In addition, the Needs and Means note may be included. If it is not included in the packet, a case manager can simply review the note in MHIS or print it out. The Needs and Means interview will provide you with very useful information from the client's perspective as to their strengths, preferences, service needs, and goals. As part of the Needs and Means assessment, a community risk identification tool was completed, as well as a risk review summary. The CRIT and RRS has identified risk issues based on the documents received, the client's Needs and Means interview, and any other information from contacts the Needs and Means staff has made. You should contact the client as soon as possible to introduce yourself and to schedule a face-to-face interview so the client can tell their story and talk about their strengths, preferences, service needs, and goals. Remember, you have only 20 business days to complete the comprehensive assessment. If you have releases for family members or significant others, the case manager should be reaching out to these individuals because their perspectives are very important. The referral source should be contacted, first to identify yourself as the newly assigned case manager, but also to see if the referral source has any additional updates or insights as to the needs of the client. It should be noted that if the referral was from an acute care hospital and the client is no longer admitted there, the case manager may not receive a return call from the referral source. If the client has a guardian, they should be contacted, as well as any other current providers that you have releases for. What if a case manager is having difficulty connecting with the client to schedule the initial meeting? Since a case manager only has 20 business days to complete the comprehensive assessment, it is recommended that a case manager reach out to the client as soon as possible. A case manager should leave a voice message for the client introducing themselves and proposing a couple of days and times to meet and request a return call. If a client hasn't returned your call by the next day or two, the case manager should explore other ways to make contact with the client. Perhaps speaking with the site staff who conducted the Needs and Means interview may be helpful. That staff person could also share how they made contact with the client and other additional suggestions. Also, an outreach letter can be sent to the client with an appointment date to meet with you. Due to the timeline to complete the comprehensive assessment, this letter should be sent within a couple of days of the initial attempt to contact the client. The case manager should review which releases they have. The referral source and/or guardian might be helpful in assisting a case manager to schedule the initial meeting. Does the case manager have releases to speak with family or significant others? They may assist the case manager in connecting with the client. Please remember that DMH case management services may be entirely new to the client, and they may be hesitant to try something unfamiliar. Perhaps a client would feel more comfortable having someone they trust accompany them to the initial meeting. Perhaps instead of having the initial meeting at the site office, the client may feel more comfortable with the case manager meeting them at places they are familiar with, such as a clubhouse or a therapist office. If a client is currently working with a program such as Adult Community Clinical Services, but is stepping down to case management, the case manager's initial meeting with the client should also include a staff person from ACCS. The client's transition from ACCS to case management will likely be much more successful with such a meeting. Initial meeting with client. A case manager's first instinct may be to print out a comprehensive assessment and to sit down with the client during their initial meeting and do a question and answer session so that the comprehensive assessment is completed. I recommend that case managers not do this. I understand the pressure that the case manager is facing to complete the comprehensive assessment in 20 business days. However, the most important goals of your initial meeting are engagement as well as assessment. It is to establish a productive working relationship with the client by carefully listening to the client's experience and perspective. This is the foundation of motivational interviewing. If a productive working relationship is not established, it is very unlikely that the relationship between the case manager and client will be positive or effective. If you focus your initial meeting with the barrage of questions, the client will likely feel overwhelmed and become defensive. They may likely not return for a second meeting. At the start of the initial meeting with the client, the case manager should assure that the client is comfortable with the encounter by the case manager explaining case management services and the first steps needed for the case manager to assist the client with their service needs and goals. The first steps being the comprehensive assessment and the ISP. It is perfectly acceptable for a case manager to bring a notepad into the meeting, but it is important that the case manager ask the client for their permission to take notes while they are talking so that the case manager will remember everything the client says. It is important that the client feel that they are in control of the meeting. If a client prefers to not answer a question, or if they are uncomfortable with a question, it is fine for the client to say this. If a client feels that they would like to end the meeting and schedule to meet again at another time, the client should feel comfortable with telling this to the case manager. A case manager will have many answers for the comprehensive assessment by doing a thorough record review and speaking with the referral source, guardian, current treaters, and family members' significant others. This information can be verified by the client and other questions asked by the case manager in the later part of the initial meeting or during a second follow-up meeting to complete the comprehensive assessment. You will very likely need more than one meeting to complete the comprehensive assessment. I strongly recommend that the case manager allot at least 90 minutes for the initial meeting with the client. The first 45 to 60 minutes should be spent encouraging a client to tell their story. The case manager should be engaged in active listening, both to what is being said as well as to what is not being said by the client. Remember, the relationship between a case manager and a client is that of a partnership. The case manager is an expert in helping people connect with community services to assist them with their service needs and goals. The client is an expert of their own life. The initial meeting should be started by asking the client an open-ended question about why they applied for DMH services and what would the client like you as their case manager to help them with. It is important to avoid questions that could be answered with yes or no responses. It is very likely that the client will have immediate critical needs such as housing, insurance, food, or locating an outpatient provider. The case manager should assist the client in the beginning to address unmet critical needs. An example of an immediate critical need that a case manager may be able to help a client with during the initial meeting is food. If a client tells you that they've spent their entire Social Security check on rent and that they have no food for the month, there are a few ways that a case manager may be able to help with that immediate critical need. A case manager can provide a list of local food pantries and meal sites. The case manager can assist the client with an online food stamp application. Also, many site offices have their own food pantry, and the case manager may be able to give the client a bag of food to take with them at the end of the initial meeting. If a client's immediate critical needs are not resolved, they will have a difficult time focusing on telling their story and answering questions to assist in the completion of their comprehensive assessment. Also, if the client sees the case manager as someone who wants to help them, the more likely the case manager will be in forming a solid, productive working relationship with the client. After a client has had the opportunity to begin to tell their story and their immediate critical needs have begun to be addressed, the case manager can then begin to ask questions needed to complete the comprehensive assessment. Remember, you will likely need more than one meeting with the client to complete the comprehensive assessment within 20 business days. As a case manager is preparing for this initial meeting, the case manager should review what releases of information are in the client record. It is important that the case manager have signed releases for the client's emergency contact person, outpatient providers, the local crisis team, PCP, and visiting nurse services, to name a few. At the end of the initial meeting, the case manager should ask the client for their signature on the needed releases. It is also recommended that the case manager bring blank releases to be completed at the end of the meeting for any individual agency that the client has identified as they begin to tell their story. Please remember that releases should be completely filled out. On page 2 of the release, a client needs to initial in 2 different places if they authorize for the case manager to receive HIV test results and/or alcohol and drug abuse records. A case manager should realize, though, particularly with substance abuse treatment agencies, that the signed and initialed DMH release may not be accepted at those facilities, and that the case manager will be required to complete and return that particular agency's release in order to receive the client records. Releases are valid for 1 year from the date of signing. However, a client can revoke this authorization at any time in writing. If a client has a guardian, or if a client is under 18, the guardian or custodial parent needs to sign the release on behalf of the client. If a client has a court-appointed guardian, be sure to have that guardianship paperwork in the client file. If a client is under 18 but has been legally determined an emancipated minor, they are able to sign their own releases. In those rare circumstances where there is a pressing need and a case manager cannot obtain a written signed release in a timely manner, a client may be able to give a case manager a verbal authorization to speak with a provider, family member, or significant other if certain conditions are met. The case manager first needs to speak with their supervisor to determine if a verbal authorization is warranted. A note needs to be entered in MHIS that this instance was reviewed with their supervisor and that the client gave verbal authorization to speak with a specific person or agency for a specified one-time purpose. The case manager should assure that a written release is obtained from the client as soon as possible. It is important that the case manager review and explain a release to the client before they sign. The client is more likely to agree to sign a release if they understand why the case manager may need to share or obtain information from an agency or person, and that this information will assist the case manager in working with the client on their service needs and goals. Remember, releases are voluntary, and a client may decline to sign any or all releases. If a client chooses not to sign releases at the initial meeting, acknowledge that you understand their hesitancy. After all, this is your first meeting. Ask the client to give their authorization some thought, and perhaps they may feel more comfortable in signing releases in future meetings with you. As a case manager is working on the comprehensive assessment, case management billing is allowed as long as there are MHIS notes documenting the fact that you are gathering information to complete the comprehensive assessment. MHIS Note Example 1, 7/25/21, regarding began comprehensive assessment. This writer reviewed Jane Smith's eligibility file and completed a portion of Part 2 of the comprehensive assessment. Plan. This writer will meet with JS at the Lowell site office on 7/28/21 at 1 p.m. for the initial meeting and to begin exploring JS's strengths, preferences, service needs, and goals to include on the comprehensive assessment. MHIS Note Example 2, 7/28/21, regarding initial meeting with client, information gathering for comprehensive assessment. This writer met with Jane Smith for our initial meeting. In addition to beginning to establish a working relationship, JS discussed what she wanted DMH assistance with, and she began to assist this writer with the comprehensive assessment. JS also signed a release for Bridgewell so that this writer can speak with her therapist. Plan. This writer and JS will meet again on 7/31/21 at 10 a.m. at the Lowell site office to continue exploring information to aid in the completion of the comprehensive assessment. Even though a case manager has 20 business days to complete the initial comprehensive assessment, it is entirely possible that the case manager will be able to bill for the first 2 billing cycles, even if the comprehensive assessment is not complete, as long as there is a targeted activity with an MHIS note. A 2-month grace period allows for a case management assignment, since the assignment may be done near the end of the month. Billing can be done for the first month as well as the second month, as long as the 20 business days have not run out. Regardless if a billable activity occurs, no billing can take place after the 2 allotted turnaround document billing cycles until the comprehensive assessment and ISP are in place. In this instance, the adult administrative exemption or the child adolescent administrative exemption should be used. As stated in the DMH Service Planning Regulations 104 CMR 29, the case manager needs to complete all documents, comprehensive assessment, and ISP within 55 calendar days from assignment. It is important to remember that the comprehensive assessment is a legal document that can be subpoenaed by the courts and have implications in investigations. Comprehensive assessments should be written professionally and objectively, which includes proper grammar and spelling. Entire words and phrases should be spelled out before using abbreviations or acronyms, such as Lowell General Hospital, in parentheses LGH. Comprehensive assessment should incorporate a client's strengths, preferences, service needs, and goals, be trauma-informed and person-centered, be sensitive and responsive to a client's sexual orientation and gender identity, including the use of chosen gender pronouns, be sensitive and responsive to a client's cultural, ethnic, and linguistic background, recognize and respect client self-determination and freedom of choice and personal responsibility. When describing a difficult history, also focused on the times in a client's past when their life situation was stable and going well, and describe what skills, strengths, and supports the client stated they were using during those stable times. In the end, success is the sum of small efforts, repeated day in and day out. Robert Collier. Thank you. I would like to thank the Northeast Area Case Management Training Focus Group, Lynette Accomando from the Lowell site, Deborah Horowitz from the Northeast Area Learning and Development, Joyce Kazuian from the Acton site, Cecily Long from the Essex North site, Deborah Wimet from the North Shore site, Dee Wimet from the Lynn site, Michael Woodham from the Metro North site.